let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the award-winning podcast where we talk about gaining, fetishism, and everything in their orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're continuing our series of dinner table talks. We've got a couple of guests here, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves one by one.
Hi there, my name is Ray. I'm coming back to participate in another roundtable. I've been on here a few times now, and I'm happy to be back.
Hi, I'm Addy, known as Addiction2Chewing on various sites, and this is my first time on this wonderful, wonderful podcast. Very pleased to be here.
Fantastic. Well, listen, we are absolutely chuffed to have you both with us today. Today we figured we'd talk a little bit about the trans experience in the round. As you'll know throughout the podcast, we like to find different opportunities to bring people on to have the conversation, not just the once, but to try to really dig through it, to give multiple opportunities, really, to explore the spectrum of what is clearly a very broad experience. So, are you both ready to get into it with us today?
Yeah, let's do it.
Absolutely.
Fabulous. So listen, while we get started here, I want to query for both of your wonderful trans individuals, how do you feel like your transness has influenced or informed how you identify within the community?
Well, I will say my first episode that I participated in, I also was answering a lot of trans questions. So I imagine that some of my responses are going to be very similar to that, but I figured it's bearing repeating. I think that it is interesting to me because I feel like it gives me a different perspective than perhaps maybe a non-trans individual might have, because I'm used to seeing bodies that don't fit the norm. And so I kind of have a more, maybe I'm more open to seeing bodies of different shapes and sizes. Not to say that other people can't be, but this is what my regular life is, to see bodies that don't fit the mold.
No, I get what you're saying there. And I think you're kind of like what you were saying is you're sort of conditioned to see bodies in various stages of transition anyway.
Yeah, and just being able to see like bodies that are transitioning, that aren't transitioning, that are in various different stages. And, there's a lot of beauty in all of the stages.
I'll say this, that I'm kind of generally a sort of person that whenever I find something that I find just somewhat interesting or unknown, that I look into it a lot and try and find out as much as I can. So both with this sphere of interests and identities of, specifically for me, gaining fetishism and inflation, that sort of categories stuff. But also in terms of identity with, the trans experience and trans identity, is that once I was introduced to them, I kind of looked into them a lot, learned a lot about them. And of course, had my own journeys with each. And the thing with me is that I kind of did those both before I really got online and into communities. So before I did any interactions with community in either realm, either IRL or online, I kind of already had this base of kind of who I was in a way, and sort of kind of how to express myself. So I kind of have a weird thing where it's I was kind of partially through these journeys before getting out into the community, which, compared to what I've heard, obviously everyone's experience is different, is, more a little not typical, where, some people get into the community first and then go through these formational journeys. But, that's just my experience.
I want to put this to you, Ray. As you say, maybe some of the questions we would ask here in the round are reflective of things that you've shared with us in the past. Do you feel like there are aspects of your transness, your gaining, things that have shifted for you since you were last on the podcast that might be worth bringing up here?
Yeah, for sure.
I think a couple of years have passed since the first episode you wrote,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it has been. It's
Yeah.
crazy to think that it's been that long already. Well, for me, I know that my role, whatever I kind of call myself in the community, has changed. I'm at a point where I'm comfortable with my weight as it is, but I'm still active as an admirer, as an encourager, and just overall just happy to be here kind of thing. I will say that I think that my mindset has changed in terms of the acceptance of things that I am not able to change. In psychology, there's a term specifically in dialectical behavioral therapy that's called radical acceptance. And it's essentially this concept that there are going to be times when you are dealt a hand of cards that is not very favorable. Instead of trying to fight against it or trying to change it when you know you really can't, to kind of accept that this is what it is and to proceed accordingly. And so I kind of take that into my journey forward, not only in my position within the community, but within my gender identity, and something that I learned throughout my transition too.
That's kind of the basis of the Serenity Prayer, isn't it?
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The Serenity Prayer, for those of you who aren't familiar, is used in a lot of rehab and recovery programs, and it essentially notes that acknowledging what you're able to control, what you're not able to control, and then knowing the difference between the two and being able to accept all of that.
They're using it sometimes in grief counseling too now.
Oh, that's awesome. I like
Yeah.
that.
I mean, I think it's a good model that maybe more gainers could afford to adopt in general. I feel like sometimes within gaming, we touched on this with a couple of episodes, especially with, I am Knuff and talking about this ever-present push to transition, to grow, to change, to perform to someone else's idea of what they think is sexy, because whatever weight you are currently, you could always be a little bit more. And I think sometimes we really do take for granted how some people have a genetic lottery, or they have financial access, or any number of intercessions that basically make gaining a lot more easy for them. Some of us don't have those things. It's okay that we don't have those things. And maybe practicing some form of serenity prayer would help some of us feel a little bit more at peace with being okay with where we're at, making do with the resources and access points that we do have, and not judging ourselves for not having the same benefits that others might have.
Are you sure you don't just it's not that you just want an excuse to say something along the lines of God grant me the fat that I am able to accept and the to deal with the fact that I can't get any fatter at the moment.
Yeah, basically, go. We've touched on this a few times, but the economy
I challenge a listener out there somewhere to create the Gainer Serenity Prayer.
do it. But honestly, like we're also in a really bad time economically speaking. So like the cost of food is really going up, and there are other priorities, sis. Like it just if I gotta pay rent. I gotta pay bills. I have to not be homeless, okay? I have to literally keep myself afloat, and that means maybe I can't afford to pick out as often. Also, like, junk food is literally on par with, like, high-end health food at the moment. It's a joke. There is no, like, cheap and affordable option no more. It is bad out there. So, look, maybe a serenity prayer would do us some good. So, yes, listeners, if you want to draft your own serenity prayer, you can send it to us at thiccradio@gmail.com, and we will gladly file that away somewhere for when we need to have a bit of serenity in the space. But I also want to say, Ray, thank you for sharing that. Again, I think more gamers could probably benefit from some form of serenity brought into the gaming process. Addy, putting this to you because, as you say, you had a bit of a foundation of a lot of these things before you came into the community. As you've joined with the space, do you feel like there are aspects of gaining transness that have been made more apparent to you, or that you felt challenged on, perhaps, in all of that?
There's kind of two things that go hand in hand that like just spring to mind with this. where it's like one thing I've noticed is that like, when you're viewing like overlaps in community and you're seeing sort of the benefits and detractions of each, is when you're in multiple communities, whether that's a fandom or a lifestyle community or, identity community, anything really, you start noticing similarities between them because, everyone's human and every person in a community is, I hope, a human, but you start noticing these good things and bad things about each. So like personally, there's a lot more like, especially in these sort of, I don't think nonconformist is the way, but like sort of communities that are in the loosest sense queer. And I don't mean in like for the listeners out there who aren't aware of like the history of queer, like the old way of meaning like strange and unusual, where it's like you look at like the gaming community, and for a long time, it was just like perceived as this very hetero thing. And then, you start getting into the actual community and you're like, no, there's actually a lot of non-binary gainers, a lot of trans gainers, bi gainers, gay gainers. Like it's so much more interesting than, what you actually assume. And that goes into like a lot of different communities. Like, even looking at like the trans community, there's so many different trans experiences than you think going in. But along with that, you also start noticing similar, like detracting talking points amongst them, where it's like you get the people who are part of the community who have these less than helpful things they say, or their understanding of what the community is. But then you also have people outside it. And like, especially for me, like I'm like a very media oriented person. So like I can see these talking points just sort of like go back and forth, and they're the exact same ones. Like you go to YouTube and you look up feedism, or the older term feederism, and it's just all these like hit talk pieces and quote unquote video essays basically commentating over footage which has nothing to do with what they're talking about. They're talking about it being abusive. They're talking about it, oh, they just want to die and stuff like that, which is in some ways similar things to what some people talk about with like the trans community, where it's, you have the quote unquote trans widows, which are these cis women who act as if their partner's dead purely because their partner comes out. The probably most famous trans widow of them all, the one who's been hurt the most, is our dear President Elon, losing a wonderful, wonderful daughter. And so like you start noticing that like both the benefits of every community are shared in every community, but also the detractions, because at the end of the day, we're all humans, and humans, no matter where you go, will still have the same benefits and the same issues. And it's just both comforting and terrifying to know that no matter where I go, no matter how I identify, that I'll find those, that I'll be able to find the cool people to talk with, like these wonderful people I'm talking to right now, but also the terrible people who I have to, even though certain people, that wonderful cool guy on the surfboard with the American flag in a movie with Jesse Eisenberg, even if he doesn't want fact checkers, I'll still go in and provide information for the people that maybe don't know as much.
I don't know if this is going to be a non sequitur, but something that you said, it just stuck with me. It was like this opinion that people have of, people that are different, people that they consider subversive, thinking, oh, they just want to die. It's like when you said they just want to die. It's like, okay, when that rattled around in my head, I was thinking, okay, death feederism, it is something that I absolutely support. And I think to myself, is that really the intent of death feederism? No. If anything, it's the exact opposite. They intend to live. It's like James when we quote Auntie Mame all the time, and we're like, life is a banquet, and some poor suckers are starving to death. So go out there and live, live, live. It's like that's what the death feeder is, or the death feedee is doing.
Yeah,
Living. Absolutely living and saying, fuck everything. I am living. So it doesn't matter how long the life is, isn't it the quality of the life? So like I hate it when people are, oh, you just it's that blanket pigeonholing of being like, oh, you just like, it's like when I was a goth. Oh, you just want attention. No, actually, I prefer not to have attention on me. I realize that I look funny, but I'm actually doing this to scare you. Well, and speaking of all this shit, like I've got my problems, but I have never had the particular issue that you and Addy, that Ray and Addy, that both of you have faced. Like I have never had to question that. But and so like I can only imagine how difficult it is to get up every day and do that and go to work and live in this world and deal with all the shit that's going on, political problems, health insurance, yada yada. I mean, how do you guys do it? Like how do you like where do you find that inner strength?
Good question. I think that the thing that really helps is knowing that there are other people around you who love you as you are and want nothing more than to see you thrive. And that can be especially hard. I think that the biggest difference between this episode and the other episode that I featured in about being trans is that this time around, I acknowledge that I'm more scared. It's not safe to be trans in the United States right now. Addy, I don't know what part of the world you live in, but I fear for us. And one of the things that I will harp on until the end of the world is that our cisgender family members really need to help out. Like Addy, when you were mentioning about, people who are commenting these awful things in various different circles. That's when we need people. That's when we need other people to step in and say, that's not okay. That's when we need people to call them out and say, how dare you for saying that about another human? And, the biggest thing right now is for us to all just band together, link arms and be in support of each other right now.
Like just for reference, like I'm in the US, I'm in the Great Lakes, but like don't get me wrong, I was terrified by, all the trans-specific stuff in the wow, Jesus, past few days. But now I'm even more terrified at like what's going on with like the FBI, where it's like I'm not really in the closet about my gender, but like I haven't really been in a position to get on hormones. For reference, I'm like trans femme for the listeners, but like I haven't really been an opportunity to like kind of dress in affirming clothing. So like I'm a little more like low key in public, personal situations, like with people I know, people that care about me and stuff like that. I'm as I don't analogy with an open door, but so specifically with like the FBI stuff is it's like these are people who aren't really named, who shouldn't be named, who no one should really specifically know have a connection, but we're just putting that information out there. Specifically, this is of course alleged, but it's looking likely, in my opinion, that it's like you want people to go after them. And it's like there are people online who are not public with their identity. And it's just frightening to know that someone, whether it being a tech CEO, whether it being a government official, just sorts of outs that information of who they are and what they are. Obviously, we've been seeing this in the past few years with like the pornography quote unquote bans in certain states, where it's like you have to physically put in your ID and to prove your age, which is like obviously we don't want people underage to, get into stuff that they maybe aren't prepared for yet and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's kind of a control feature because it's like, oh, we know who exactly is getting on this. We know exactly what you're looking at, which is, again, like a terrifying idea because, like, some people just aren't ready to go out with that information, whether it's gender identity or sexual interests or romantic interests or even more things like that. And it's a terrifying idea to have any of that just publicly outed against your will by someone you've quote unquote put trust in, whether that is the government or a trusted company or even just a porn site. You can trust those, but that's neither here nor there. And it's just something that I don't think any of us thought would happen as forcefully as it is. And it's just terrifying.
I want to put to the both of you, because obviously this is an opportunity to talk about transness in the round. And I think the time in the world that it is, this is a pertinent conversation for what we should be talking about. As far as the gaining community is concerned, are there aspects of transness that you think the gaining community at large need to be more switched onto or plugged into in terms of not just being aware of, but contributing to an allyship?
Well, referencing a little bit again what we might have mentioned previously of, being mindful that people who are trans and non-binary in the world are at risk. We have a lot up against us right now. And I think that, and just with like, everybody, let's encourage one another in whatever way that needs to be, affirm people in the way that feels good, whether you want to be called handsome or gorgeous or, whatever, what are the affirmations that are best for you? Please use them. I think that something so small like that can really make a difference, which is why even something as simple as just using the right goddamn pronouns makes such a huge difference. I can't tell you how much it made a difference for me, especially when I was starting out, because I didn't pass at all for a really long time. But when, like, I don't know, random individuals, would hear it, when I would hear them use he, him pronouns, like it felt like there was a light that lit up inside me. And it was just, it felt like 10 pounds was lifted off of my shoulders, metaphorically speaking. Just little things like that, I think, go a long way. So just kind of remembering, that each person is different and, be willing to, know what each person wants, what each person needs, be willing to support them in that.
Kind of have like three big things which like connect to that, because obviously, you are insanely correct. Like it's just basic respect that we need to show to each other, whether we're trans or not. Like just call people by what they prefer to be called by. Don't be a dick about it. But also, like, I think people need kind of like two bits. One is like just basic internet interactions where it's like read someone's bio before commenting something if you're going to refer to them specifically, or even, God forbid, message them, because there's some weird people out there who just see a random profile picture, not even a post, not even an image or a video, and just instantly get horned up over that. And it gets, it's just as simple as taking 2 seconds and reading a bio, or even a second and reading pronouns if the pronouns are in the bio. But also, like, I think there's kind of like two broader elements where it's like you could do 5 minutes of research and be so much more well educated. Like, as said before, there's so much intersectionality over like basic things that you can look up and be like, oh, I understand it better now. Where it's like kind of like the psychological part of it. It's like, in the past you had these like weird ways of referring to trans people where it's like, oh, the old you is dead and the new you is someone completely different, which is not really kind of how that works. We're still the same people, even if, certain aspects of us are different, even if it's just as simple as wearing, a different shirt than we usually do to, feel more affirmed. Like, it's not this whole thing of like, oh, we're a completely different person. No, we're just able to express ourselves better than we were in the past. Then that goes with, gaining too, where it's like, no, most of us don't want to be the stereotypical, like, fat, slobby mess that just wants to be lazy. Like, some of us do. And that's obviously each to their own. And like, there's more stuff they want to do beyond that. It's not they just want to make that their whole personality. There's so much to the experience beyond that. And everyone's experience is different. And obviously there's so much more to like the psychological aspect. It's not just like, oh, we want to let go. No, we want to, again, express ourselves in ways that we weren't able to beforehand, whether that's eating more than we used to because we just enjoy eating, whether that's, just feeling more comfortable in a larger body, so on and so forth. But then also, like, to connect to that, like the scientific aspect where it's like Kentucky. Kentucky did a trans sports ban because, trans women are so much superior to cis women. And there's like a single trans athlete in schools in Kentucky. And even beyond that, like, obviously none of the research supports that claim. I'm forgetting her first name, but Thomas, the swimmer, the college
Leah.
swimmer.
Was it
Leah,
Leah?
thank you.
She was in the Olympics, right?
I think she was trying to be. I'm not sure if she's been in the Olympics yet. But like, if you actually look at her placements in the various types of swimming she was doing, she's not really placing towards the top. Like, she's still a great swimmer, but like, she's not to the degree that that one person who tied with her for fifth place and is now in a terrible Daily Wire movie and all the conservative news channels and podcasts. Like that one person is just as good as her. And they're both worse than other people, relatively speaking. Obviously, they're like all high performing athletes who are definitely better swimmers than I am. But like, in that short comparison of the 5 people in that race to tie for fifth, I'm just saying, like, the science is not there to support this idea that, oh, we're superior or better. The science says we're either just as good or there's just as much variability as cis swimmers and cis athletes in general. And then, of course, you have the weird chess stuff, which is terrible in its own right for its just blatant misogyny of like, oh, men can't play with women and stuff like that. And it's just ridiculous. And the same thing goes with gaining and, fetism in general, where it's like they act as if, oh, if you gain anything over like this set goal number, that you're going to instantly have all the health issues, which again, like variety with people. Some people are going to experience issues earlier, some later, some maybe not at all until like what most people would call an extreme number, but like we call just a cool number. And it's just having like that basic understanding of like the psychology and the science behind it. Like you don't have to have like a master's in this. You just have the basic understanding of like, oh, the science doesn't back this up, and I really shouldn't be saying this under someone's comment. Like if someone's just, at Disney or on a cruise and they're just enjoying themselves and having a drink like anyone else would, don't comment. Don't comment that they should lose weight, because they've probably heard 20,000 other uneducated people say the exact same thing. Like it's fine to be concerned. That's a normal thing. If someone in life is at a point that you probably wouldn't be, it's normal to feel a little concerned, but don't go over the edge with that concern. Don't like try and force them to do something. Don't try and completely shame them. Like that's not a productive thing to do. That is the exact opposite of what you should be doing. And, you're just causing more harm by extension of that. So like when I was like not in the community, but very much looking at community spaces online for like fetism, like I was there for like the transition of like the terminology where it's like feederism to fetism. And like I think knowing what these terms mean, especially in the community, because there's a lot of people who are either older in the community who aren't, as up and up with like what certain terms mean in the community. But then you also have people who get into the community who only look at that older stuff. And like, obviously that's also like, interconnected with the trans community, where it's like, certain terms that don't really work anymore are both used by older people who that's just the term they know and the term they're used to, like transvestite, like obviously still in the lexicon because, Rocky Horror Picture Show's fun. But like there's older trans people and some cross-dressers who still use transvestite. And
Yeah.
I think that that's fine to an extent. Like don't call newer people that, but like it's fine to refer to yourself and other people who are in that community by that. And the same thing goes for like fetism, where it's like nowadays we kind of have a better understanding of like we're removing the dominant figure from the act. We're making it more just a broad term that can apply to anyone in like any situation. Same thing with like just trans. Just call people trans. You don't have to call them transsexual. You don't have to call them transgender. Like trans is fine. It's a broad term that applies to most people who go through that experience and that identity. And I think also like we need to put more emphasis on feeder gainer, where it's like not every feedie is a gainer, not every gainer is a feedie. You don't need a feeder to be a feedie, like that sort of thing, where it's like we need to really emphasize what these terms mean, because like you still get people in Instagram comments, partially because like the societal push by certain aspects of like media and talking heads and the bad podcast, quote unquote, the ones that aren't Thicc Radio. I'm teasing here, where, it's like you say trans man and they think that is a quote unquote man that wants to be a woman, or you say trans woman and that's a quote unquote woman that wants to be a man. And it's like, no, that is the complete opposite. Or you get the ridiculous people who think that cis is a slur. And it's like, what are you even smoking right now? Like on Instagram, on my non-gainer account, I was just doom scrolling, as I'm sure a lot of us have reserved ourselves to over the past few months. And I'm looking at this comment, and not only are they saying cis is a slur, but they're saying cis is a pronoun, which is wild that they have manipulated pronouns enough to think that A, they're slurs, and B, that just anything's a pronoun now. And it's just like we as a community and, you know, affirming people outside of the community, whether that's family, friends, online acquaintances, because there are spaces that like are just very kink focused in, sort of the quote unquote size sphere, where it's, interconnected things like breast expansion, butt expansion, fetism, weight gain, blueberry, then giantess and micro, pregnancy to mpreg, the things dealing with size change, size growth of any part of the body. And like those spaces have those communications where it's like people who aren't into it still learn the terminology and they're still affirming, where it's like, we as people just should be more affirming, should do the basic research that takes a minute, 2 minutes. Like, not saying you should go out and read the textbook that you guys recently did an episode on, using the word loosely, but just do a minute or two of research to realize, oh, a feeder isn't always a guy. Oh, a feedie doesn't want to eat until they die.
Mm.
There's gay gainers? What?
All of that.
That sort of basic thing of like, learn language.
I'm old enough to remember that there was a time in the gay community, back when we just said gay community, that a lot of trans individuals felt that they were kind of separate from us. They kind of felt like, oh, we're not really gay because after we've transitioned, we're technically like straight, or like if it was like if there's a man transitioning into a woman and like is like sexuality like is a lesbian, there was that the trans woman would now say that she's a lesbian, and not straight. But basically, like, after they had been assigned, or after they had gotten their reassignment, they felt that they were no longer a part of the community. I've noticed that that's definitely changed. Do you guys feel that that was just a generational thing, or do you think that there was like a sort of conscious movement on the part of the trans community to say, no, we need to fold back in with everybody. We don't need to be separating ourselves any further.
I think it's just a societal thing, because like to bring up a little like queer history for like listeners who don't know it, either, because there's a lot of queer people who don't know queer history, and there's also like a lot of, straight people and cis people who don't know queer history. But like the Stonewall Inn, the big iconic moment of trans activism, which like of course we've done a lot more since, and you should look into that. But like you have trans people who were at Stonewall, and it was primarily like gay bar run by the mafia, but like there were trans people there were drag queens and cross dressers at Stonewall Inn, so like they took part in Stonewall. And you have people like, oh god, I'm forgetting one of their names.
Marsha P. Johnson.
And I forget
Sylvia Rivera, is that the one?
Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. Thank you. Sorry. I just, there's so much going on in the world. It's hard to remember things sometimes. But like they did this speech in, I think, Columbus Circle. I could be wrong about the location in New York. And it's recorded. It's on YouTube. And one of them is up at the mic just condemning the gay community at the time for not knowing, and this is like in the 70s, only a few years after Stonewall, not like aligning themselves with the trans community and demonizing them, despite the fact they were also fighting the same battles with the gay community. And, it's just like, as time went on, and it took until like the 90s to really consider bi people as part of like the community, then trans people by like the end of the decade. Then, you start getting everyone else in the 2000s and 2010s, and now 2020s, certain groups, where it's like, it was such a big change that had to happen of queer people getting involved in community, putting themselves out there, making media in general, and like putting this change into the society of not only the broader world as it applies to various countries and their various fights, for acceptance than rights, but also like within the community itself, where it's like this is a thing that we've been working at and is happening. Like it can't really be avoided that like a few trans people have broken into like the large content creators, with porn now, where it's like you'll have this very big creator or studio just bring in like a very well-known non-binary or trans creator. And we're starting to see this bigger change where it's like, oh yeah, they're a fetus, they're a gainer, they're here with me making this content. And like it's slowly happening. And now like we have the whole political sphere kind of mucking that up a bit, but like it's been a slow change, but it's been a greatly appreciated change.
I get, and again, from a different slice of my own personal perspective, I think that the thing that perhaps is something to kind of like remember a little bit is, in the same way that, and, I'm sure that this also hasn't really gone anywhere, but, the target has kind of shifted, so to speak. Back when the enemy was the gay man who was going to go after your children. Now the enemy is trans people who want to give your children gender reassignment surgeries during recess and stuff like that. And I think I remember this, and it's a poem I've been thinking of a lot recently. It's the poem First They Came by Pastor Martin Niemöller. There's an umlaut in there, and I don't know pronunciation, but it was essentially the one of first they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. First they came for this, then they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. In that same way, I guess that this is kind of just another plead to anyone either in the gainer community, with it out throughout the community, of just like realize that if they're not coming for one of us, we're gonna get slowly picked off. We cannot be separating ourselves. Personally, I try to lump us all in of like we are all, in the category of, sexual and gender minorities. You know, sure, we might have multiple letters, so to speak, but we all belong to this wider community of sexual and gender minorities. And we really need to link arms right now, because they'll slowly pick us off one by one. And I know that that poem was made during the Holocaust. And there are too many references that are being made right now about the Holocaust now, way more than I could care for. So just another please, let's support each other, please.
Absolutely. And, this is again one of the reasons why one of the reasons why we want to do episodes like this, like it's about like transness and gaining, and we can talk a bit about the gaining aspect, of course, but like it's really, and I think we actually talked about this with your first episode, Ray. It's like, what is pertinent to this conversation right now? It would be so nice to say that, the most pressing issue on the minds of trans gainers is whether or not the way you gain weight on the body is affirming in the gender or not, right? Like, fabulous. But that's not the world we're living in. And this podcast, while it addresses and centers gaining, exists in the world and is connected to the world. And that's really, really the kind of point here. The gainer idea is like, I am worthy of having like everything I deserve and extra because I should take up more space, right? Like, that is the gainer adage. Can we not like just offer that up to the people around us who maybe need to have a little bit right now?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
How are we all feeling at the moment? I know obviously this is I mean, I think it always ends up being the case, but I think that's, it's the world and it's the way things are, right? Like it's a heavy conversation. It's,
I think it was kind of unavoidable,
mm,
with the political atmosphere that it was going to go to a deeper place. But I do think that this has been a really great conversation, and I know that we have trans listeners, and they're
mm.
going to take something away from this that is like, because right now it's just fucking nuts. We don't even know if any of us are Americans right now. That's kind of up in the air.
I think that the kind of more generalized shift of like not just here we are within the gaming community specifically, but rather like zooming out to see how the world we live in affects real life people that we see either online or whatnot all the time, and kind of realizing that maybe the people that we see that we find really hot and attractive that we might be, jerking off to have real life concerns and that there's a lot of complexity in their lives. And so kind of showing that, like, yeah, these are people who are afraid right now. And what these people need is others letting them know that they are wanted and they are valued as they are, and that you're happier to know that they are in your life, and that we don't want them to leave. I'm sorry, this has just been a lot more of an emotional episode than I was anticipating, but here we are.
There is something kind of want to add real quick that's
Yes.
just slightly more uplifting, if that's possible.
Go for it.
Please.
So this kind of goes out to anyone who's like a fetus gainer, that maybe isn't out there in the community, but this also goes to trans people in the community. Please realize that, like, literally and figuratively, that this community is much larger than you think it is. There's some people in some trans groups on my campus who I'm just like talking to, and then like we share some things, and I'm like, oh shit, you're a fetus? Like, half the people I know that are fetists in my area are trans. Of course, those are the people I know. I don't know everyone who's a fetist, but like other people I know are trans. And it's like there's a lot of us just going around living our lives without anyone else knowing. So just be aware of that, is that you're not alone. Like there are so many people who are trans, who are fetists, who are trans fetists, like just living their lives, doing their stuff, and you'll never know. But do know that they are around you. They are going through relatively similar stuff to you. Obviously, everyone's like journey's different, but like they are going through the same political stresses as you. They are going through a lot of the similar societal stresses. So like you are not alone with going through what you're going through. And then along with that, like we need to look back at the history of just everything in general and realize what we can do going forward, especially now when, there's people trying to prevent people from accessing that history. I'm going to do a little shout out here to just a museum I highly respect, but the Jim Crow Museum, which is in Big Rapids, Michigan, at Ferris State University, which is a college to say the least. It is, as far as I know, the only museum about everyday racism. Like, obviously, there are museums about specifically segregation, and generally Black history are very important. But Jim Crow specifically focuses on small everyday items. Like, they have a wall of postcards just shipped in the US Postal Service. And remember, the US Postal Service didn't let you mail porn or lewd images, but they let you mail images of lynchings just to anyone you wanted around the country. And it's shocking. And then you also have kitchenware and toys and kids' books. Like, there's just so much casual stuff. And same thing goes for like trans and gay community. There's so much casual slang and representation in media, which if you're interested about like trans and gay media, I recommend Celluloid Closet, which is this documentary from the 90s, and Disclosure, which is this documentary on Netflix. Obviously, I've got strange feelings about Netflix, but it's still a great documentary with a lot of great presenters on that, going into the history and representation of trans and gay people in media. And like, we should learn from our past mistakes to be like, maybe we don't need the quote unquote mammy cookie jar. Maybe that's not a good thing to have on the counter in my bakery. Maybe it's not a great thing to have this sort of gay rep on a show, still have gay rep, but like, maybe don't do it like you wanted to because that's very offensive. Maybe don't have that joke about a trans woman at a urinal, like kind of look at that. And then also to tie it back into this podcast, like you guys are doing a series of episodes on gainer media, specifically like movies, and like realize some of the faults in those media, like to the listeners, where it's like, maybe this trope isn't exactly one we want to push forward with. Death Becomes Her is like one that jumps to mind, where it's like Death Becomes Her is like an iconic movie. People love it. It's just got a Broadway adaptation, but like the gaining sub-story isn't the best. And it's like, maybe we should avoid those type of storylines moving forward if we want to like create more inclusive media, both outside the community, but also inside the community, where it's like, it's fine to address some of that stuff, but like maybe the way we go about it is different, So just like generally know that there's other people out there just like you or similar to you who are going through similar experiences to you. You're not alone. And also please look into the history of like your community, of other communities, of society in general, and realize how we can improve each of them.
I don't feel like there is a pithy way to end this episode because I think, as we've, talked about through today, it's heavy. It is what it is. And I really hope that for the listeners out there, seek community, seek education, seek support, and in turn, where you have room to offer in turn support, kindness, grace, understanding, love and lightness, and all of the positivity that you can, because it is a challenging and trying time, to say the least. So yeah, Thicc Radio wants to continue to be that. We want to continue holding space for conversations, no matter how challenging, because those are the conversations that need to be had, and that's what we started this to do. So thank you both, challenging as this was, for sharing, for giving, for being open and honest. Thank you. With all this being said, where can our listeners find each of you online?
I am translaardvak on Instagram.
You can find me on Instagram, Curvage, Feabie, and Grommr, as well as OnlyFans under the name addictiontochewing.
Fantastic. Well, everyone, that is a wrap for now here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. If you really like this episode and if you got something out of it, if you like the podcast or just us in general, please share it with your friends, encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at ThiccieMouse. You can also look us up on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or at our website at podpage.com/Thicc Radio. If you want to submit a voice note or become a financial supporter of the show, you can find the links in the show notes. And you can always write to us at thethickradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Enter app podcast produced by Stannnum and Thickie Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify Free.